Well, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our PhD student in Old Testament, Robb Coleman, forward. He's one of the tip top, the cream of the crop here at Southeastern, and he'll be giving his paper entitled Leviticus 25, 44 through 46 in context, a literary study. Take it away, Robb.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. So can everyone see that PowerPoint? Can you just confirm that, Christy? I'm sorry. All right, so the PowerPoint is on display. Very good. All right, here we go. And I will begin. All right, I'm just going to begin by reading the text in English to prepare us for the argument of this paper. We'll look at the Hebrew in a moment. It says, Leviticus 25, 44 to 46, as for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. You may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you and their clans that are with you, who have been born in your land, and they may be your property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession forever. You may make slaves of them, but over your brothers, the sons of Israel, you shall not rule over another ruthlessly. Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 contains numerous interpretive and ethical problems, and despite the voluminous literature on Leviticus, many of these problems have been insufficiently attended to. These problems include, but are not limited to, the following. Number one, what is the nature of the slavery to which the foreigner is subjected in Leviticus 25? Debt slavery or chattel slavery? Number two, did Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 permit and even encourage the Israelites to abuse or oppress their slaves? And number three, why does Leviticus 25, 39 to 55 outline unequal slave laws for the Israelite and foreigner, an uncharacteristic move in the Holiness Code? This study attempts to answer all three of these questions by examining Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 within its immediate literary context and within its larger literary context, the entire Holiness Code in Leviticus 17 to 26. When Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 is examined within its literary context, it seems clear that Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 outlines chattel slavery rather than debt slavery. That Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 did not permit and or encourage the Israelites to abuse their slaves, and that the reason for the unusual inequality in law results from Yahweh's unique redemption of Israel to be his exclusive slaves. These three questions and answers, considered in this order, form the outline of the paper. So I want to begin with a survey of the text. Leviticus 25, 39 to 55 neatly divides into three subsections. Leviticus 25, 39 to 43, 44 to 46, and 47 to 55. Each section concludes with an injunction against harsh treatment of one's Israelite brother. This ethical exhortation at or near the conclusion of each case law marks the threefold division of the text. The first subsection prohibits Israelites from becoming debt slaves. Instead, the indebted Israelite who sells himself to his brother may only perform the work of a sachir, a hired worker. Moreover, the creditor must release his fellow Israelite debtor and his family in the Jubilee year. The rationale for this legislation is that the Israelites belong solely to Yahweh as his slaves, and therefore they may not be the slaves of another, even a fellow Israelite. The admonition in 25:43, you will not rule over him with severity, implies that subjecting a fellow Israelite to debt slavery contradicts Yahweh's redemption of Israel from Egypt, and constitutes oppression of one's brother and his family. The second section receives detailed treatment below, and so we'll bracket that for the moment. The third section of the text, Leviticus 25, 47 to 55, concerns a situation in which an Israelite becomes impoverished and sells himself and his family to a resident alien. The law outlines the process by which an Israelite may redeem their fellow Israelite from indebtedness to a resident alien. The admonition against oppressing one's fellow Israelite appears again in 25:53. He will not rule over him with severity before you. The text then states that in the absence of wealthy kin, the resident alien must release the Israelite of his indebtedness in the Jubilee year. The unit concludes again with the familiar legal rationale and metaphor from Leviticus 25:42. The sons of Israel belong to Yahweh alone as his slaves, and therefore they may not belong to anyone else as slaves. Now, this immediate literary context of Leviticus 25:44 to 46 provides a framework within which I interpret Leviticus 25:44 to 46. And now I'm going to survey the Hebrew text of Leviticus 25:44 to 46 in light of Leviticus 25:39 to 55 to see what this particular case law permitted in ancient Israel. Leviticus 25:44. This text allowed, or this law, I should say, allowed the ancient Israelites to purchase foreigners from the surrounding nations. But as for your male slave or your female slave, who may belong to you from the nations which are around you, from them, from the nations, you may buy a male slave or a female slave. Leviticus 25:44 begins with a disjunctive vav to differentiate this section, which permits slavery for the foreigner, from the previous section, which prohibited all forms of slavery for the Israelites. Therefore, I translate the first clause of Leviticus 25:44, but as for your male and your female slaves who may belong to you. Although Eved and Amah can refer to various types of servanthood or slavery, for reasons I won't detail here, either debt slavery or chattel slavery seem to be in view in this verse. Ethnic distinctions form the basis of this permission. But as for your male slave or your female slave who may belong to you from the nations which are around you, Israelites could purchase individuals from the neighboring nations, Edom, Moab, Ammon, Philistia, Phoenicia, Syria, etc., as slaves simply because they were not Israelites. Yahweh delivered his treasured possession, the Israelites, from foreign slavery in Egypt. In Yahweh's land, they were forbidden from becoming debt slaves or chattel slaves of any other master because they belonged exclusively to him as his slaves. Since the surrounding nations did not belong to Yahweh as his slaves and had not been redeemed by Yahweh from Egyptian slavery, they could then become slaves of the Israelites. Now, the text of Leviticus 25:45 to 46. This law permitted the ancient Israelites to purchase resident aliens as permanent, inheritable, and alienable property, or prohibited the ancient Israelites from subjecting their fellow Israelites to this status, as the text says. Moreover, from the sons of Israel who sojourn with you, from them you may purchase a male slave and a female slave, and from their clan which is with you, those who were born in your land, and they may become your property. And you may make them an inheritance for your sons after you, to inherit them as property. Permanently you may work them, but over your brothers, the sons of Israel, each one over his brother, you will not rule over him with severity. So what then is the nature of the slavery to which the foreigner and resident alien are subjected in Leviticus 25:44 to 46? Is it debt slavery or is it chattel slavery? To answer this question, I will highlight the salient features of the language in the text that we just briefly examined. Notice that just as Leviticus 25:44 permitted the ancient Israelites to purchase slaves from the surrounding nations, so also Leviticus 25:45 permitted the ancient Israelites to purchase slaves from the resident alien, from their clans, and from their children. Leviticus 25:45c clarifies that purchasing a resident alien and their children transforms the resident alien into alienable property. The lexeme achuza occurs 66 times in the Hebrew Bible. 63 times it refers to some form of alienable property, land possession, or inheritance. Once, Achuzah refers to Yahweh himself as the possession of the Levites, and twice, Achuzah refers to human beings. In light of the use of Achuzah throughout the Hebrew Bible, and especially in light of the use of Achuzah to refer to the land of the Beit Ab in Leviticus 25, earlier in the passage, it seems clear that these non-Israelites receive the same legal status as land, according to Leviticus 25, 44 to 46. Just as the land was alienable property, so also the foreign slaves could become or did become alienable property. Leviticus 25:46 confirms this interpretation of Leviticus 25:45. The verse begins by clarifying that the foreign slaves are not simply alienable property, but inheritable property whom the Israelites may bequeath to their children for generations. And you may make them an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them as property. The next clause clarifies that the Israelites can permanently subject these foreign slaves to chattel slavery. Permanently, you may work them. If there was any doubt that Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 concerns chattel slavery, the specific language used in Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 puts those doubts to rest. The buying and selling of human beings as permanent, inheritable, and alienable property is the definition of chattel slavery. Leviticus 25, 45 to 46 allow the ancient Israelites to own foreigners and resident aliens, to place these human beings in the same category as their land, and to use their bodies as productive property, just as they would use their land as productive property. Now, that of course raises another question in our minds, perhaps, about the treatment of foreign chattel slaves. The final clause of Leviticus 25:46 contrasts the treatment of foreign chattel slaves with the treatment of indebted Israelites. But over your brothers, the sons of Israel, each one over his brother, you will not rule over him with severity. The contrast between the content of this clause and the previous clauses suggests that the vav, again, at the beginning of this clause, should be translated disjunctively, as I mentioned a moment ago. But over your brothers, you will not rule over him with severity. Moreover, central to the meaning of this clause is the allusion to Exodus 1, 13 to 14. You see there, you will not rule over him with severity. The Hebrew Bible uses the lexeme perech, harshness or severity, 6 times, twice in Exodus 1, 3 times in Leviticus 25, and once in Ezekiel 34. Exodus 1, 13 to 14 summarizes the way that the Egyptian slave masters treated their slaves. The Egyptians worked the sons of Israel with severity. They made their lives bitter with hard work, with mortar and with brick and with all the work in the field, all their work which they worked them with severity. Leviticus 25:46c uses the same prepositional phrase as Exodus 1, 13 to 14, perech plus beit. Moreover, the preceding literary context of Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 refers to Yahweh's deliverance of the Israelites from this oppressive slavery in Egypt. The shared language between these texts and their shared content suggests that Leviticus 25:46c alludes back to Exodus 1, 13 to 14 to forbid the ancient Israelites from subjecting one another to the treatment that they received or that their ancestors received from the Egyptians. Now, this is important to note here. Some scholars have suggested that the permission of subjecting foreigners to chattel slavery in 25:44 to 46b immediately contrasted with the prohibition against mistreatment of a fellow Israelite in 25:46c necessarily implies that Leviticus 25:44 to 46 permitted the mistreatment, oppression, and abuse of the foreign chattel slaves. For example, Jeffrey Stackert, in his insightful dissertation, writes this: just as the Israelite slave was treated ruthlessly in Egypt, so may the foreign slave be treated ruthlessly in Israel. The humanitarian impulse of H generally, the Holiness Code generally, toward the foreigner is thus mitigated here by the historical memory of Egyptian slavery. Stackert's argument may initially appear persuasive. However, upon further reflection, I believe that his argument should be reversed. The historical memory of Egyptian slavery probably prevented the ancient Israelites from utilizing this text as a permission to mistreat their foreign chattel slaves. I will briefly summarize Stackert's argument and then respond to it. I'm not trying to create verbs here. The memory of Egyptian slavery pervades Leviticus 25, 39 to 55. Yahweh reminds the Israelites that they belong to him alone as his slaves because he delivered them from the oppression of Egyptian slavery. The metaphor of Yahweh as Israel's slave master grounds the prohibition against enslaving a fellow Israelite and mistreating them. Yahweh is the Israelites' sole master, and he forbids onerous treatment of his slaves. Moreover, as mentioned above, Leviticus 25, 43, and 46c allude to Exodus 1, 13 to 14 to differentiate the Israelites' treatment of one another from the Egyptians' oppressive treatment of the Israelites. Again, Stackert concludes from this data that Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 allowed the Israelites to abuse their foreign chattel slaves, since these verses only prohibit mistreatment of a fellow Israelite, but they do not expressly forbid the mistreatment of an Israelite's foreign chattel. Therefore, for Stackert, Leviticus 25, 45 to 46 contradicts the obvious humanitarian impulse of H. Now, Stackert draws a plausible implication from the data. In fact, I was at one time convinced by his argument. However, it is more plausible to imply from this data that although Leviticus 25, 45 to 46 reduces foreigners and resident aliens to chattel slaves, or at least allows for that, the historical memory of Egyptian slavery in H intended to prevent the Israelites from oppressing, mistreating, abusing their chattel slaves. Remember, the Israelites experienced horrific abuse at the hands of their Egyptian slave masters. Again, just read Exodus 1 to 5 to review that tragic story. By recalling such horrific abuse in his allusion to Exodus 1, 13 to 14, the author of H subtly discourages the Israelites from inflicting such mistreatment on their foreign chattel slaves. He invites the Israelites to remember their suffering, the memory of which would dissuade them from perpetuating this type of suffering in the land. Contra Stacker, the pervasive humanitarian ethic throughout H enhances the plausibility of this interpretation instead of contradicting it. Leviticus 19, 33 to 34 explicitly forbids the oppression of foreigners based on the historical memory of Egyptian slavery. Concerning the foreigner who sojourns with you in your land, you will not oppress him. As the native among you, so will be the foreigner who sojourns with you, and you will love him as yourself, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh, your God. If the same author wrote Leviticus 19, 33 to 34 and Leviticus 25, 44 to 46, a supposition which Stackert grants, then the use of the historical memory of Egypt in Leviticus 19, 33 to 34 may inform the use of the historical memory of Egypt in Leviticus 25. If the author of H forbid oppression of foreigners based on the historical memory of Egypt in Leviticus 19, it is highly unlikely that he would permit the oppression of foreigners in Leviticus 25 based on the same historical memory. Interestingly, Leviticus 25, 23 to 24 may also support my contention that Leviticus 25, 46c does not permit or did not permit the Israelites to mistreat their foreign chattel slaves. Leviticus 25, 23 portrays the Israelites as resident aliens in Yahweh's land. The land will not be sold in perpetuity, for the land belongs to me. For you are resident aliens with me. Just as the Israelites formally understood the experience of the foreigner, they also currently understand the experience of the resident alien. The Israelites' shared experience with the foreigner and resident alien functioned as a guide for the Israelites in their relationship with the foreigner and resident alien. Although the Israelites did have a privileged status vis-a-vis the foreigner and resident alien in the land, they also shared the foreigners and resident aliens' social status vis-a-vis Yahweh. And therefore, they should abstain from oppressing the foreigner because they themselves experienced the horror of oppression in Egypt. And they should abstain from oppressing the resident alien because Yahweh does not oppress them. In these ways, the Israelites would mirror Yahweh's ways in the land of Canaan, as the Holiness Code, regularly exhorts them to. Ultimately, both Stackert and I have drawn unprovable implications from the contrast between Leviticus 25:46c and Leviticus 25:44 to 46b, and from the contrast between Leviticus 25:46c and related texts in the Holiness Code like Leviticus 19. In my estimation, however, the evidence adduced above suggests that Leviticus 25:46c did not permit the ancient Israelites to oppress the foreigner or the resident alien, even though they could submit them to the status of chattel slavery. Now, finally, I want to think about the rationale for the unusual legislation in Leviticus 25. This is unusual for the Holiness Code. Native and foreigner are normally equal under the law. In H. If Stackert's solution to the problem of inequality in Leviticus 25:44 to 46 is unsatisfactory, what other solutions are available to us? Jacob Milgram perhaps directs us to the right path, even though his answer may not be totally satisfactory. He writes, "It must therefore be presumed that the axiom of Yahweh's bestowal of inheritable land exclusively on the Israelites to the exclusion of the resident alien," and we might add that the permissions regarding slavery, "takes priority in H's theological system over his egalitarian ideal of the alien's equality before the law." Indeed, as we've noted already, Leviticus 25:39 to 55 grants Israel a unique relationship with and status before Yahweh vis-a-vis the resident alien. The Israelites are Yahweh's slaves, whom Yahweh delivered from Egyptian slavery to belong to him as their master. The resident aliens are not Yahweh's redeemed slaves. And so for H, specific economic and social privileges attend this status. However, despite the social inequality that Leviticus 25:39 to 46 permits, one must not forget that Leviticus 25:47 to 55 provides a caveat to this inequality. Leviticus 25:47 to 55 envisions a situation in which the social roles are reversed. According to H, the resident alien may become wealthy, own land, and become the creditor of an impoverished Israelite debtor. Leviticus 25:44 to 46 permits a resident alien to become a chattel slave, but it does not require that all resident aliens become permanent chattel slaves. Indeed, Leviticus 25:47 to 55 allows the resident alien to climb to the top of the social ladder if he can. Certainly, Leviticus 25:47 to 55 still includes inequality under the law. After all, unlike a foreign chattel slave, the indebted Israelite in this text may be redeemed, or in the worst case scenario, go free in the Jubilee year. Nevertheless, Leviticus 25:47 to 55 must chasten our reading of Leviticus 25:39 to 46. H sets aside his penchant for total equality between Israelite and resident alien due to what Milgram calls his theological priorities. But even in this complicated text, he does not completely abandon one of his central themes: equality under the law for for native and foreigner. So in conclusion, this paper has argued that in light of its literary context, Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 outlines chattel slavery rather than debt slavery, that Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 did not permit or encourage the Israelites to abuse, mistreat, or oppress their slaves, and that the reason for the unusual inequality in this slave law results from Yahweh's unique redemption of Israel to be his exclusive slaves. Thank you.